Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be diving into memory, specifically episodic memory.
Okay.
That's the kind that lets you mentally travel back in time and kind of relive past experiences.
Yeah, like mental time travel.
Exactly. And to guide us through all this, we're using Endel Tulving's book, Elements of Episodic Memory.
It's a classic.
Yeah, definitely foundational text in the field, but
Dense.
it can be pretty dense.
Yeah.
But luckily, we have an expert here to help us unpack it all.
Well, I'll do my best.
So before we get into the book itself, can you tell us a bit about Endel Tulving? Who was he? What's his story?
Yeah, so he's considered like one of the giants in memory research.
Oh, wow.
And what I find really interesting about this book is that it's not just like a dry textbook,
Yeah.
He actually makes it pretty personal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he shares stories from his own research journey and even his beliefs about science, how those have changed over time.
That's cool. I like when scientists kind of let you peek behind the curtain a bit, Makes it feel more human.
Absolutely.
So, okay, his book, Elements of Episodic Memory. Why is it so important?
Well, one reason is the timing.
Okay.
It was written back in 1983.
Wow, so a while ago.
Yeah, before episodic memory research really exploded, you know? So in a lot of ways, it set the stage for everything that came after.
Like a precursor.
Yeah, and one of his main arguments in the book is that memory is not just one big thing.
Huh, interesting.
He says it's made up of different systems, and he really focuses on the difference between episodic and semantic memory.
Yeah, I think most people just think of memory as one thing.
Right, it's easy to do.
So can you break down that difference for us, episodic versus semantic memory?
Sure. So think of semantic memory like your mental encyclopedia. It's
Yeah.
all the facts and concepts, like knowing that Paris is the capital of France or,
That water boils at 100 degrees Celsius.
right, exactly. Episodic memory, though, is all about your personal experiences. It's remembering that time you visited the Eiffel Tower, how the wind felt, the taste of the crepes you had.
So it's more like reliving the experience.
Yes. It allows you to mentally time travel back to that event and experience it again, including the emotions.
So semantic memory is knowing that something is true, and episodic is remembering the experience of it happening.
Perfect summary.
But I guess I'm wondering, does that difference really matter? Why do we need to separate these two types of memory?
Well, Tulving argues that it's super important for studying memory effectively.
Okay.
He points out that a lot of those classic memory experiments where people memorize lists of words or numbers, they might actually be tapping into semantic memory more than episodic.
Huh. So you think you're studying one thing, but you might actually be studying something else.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that could really mess up the results.
That's a good point.
How?
Okay, so what evidence did Tulving use to support this idea of separate systems?
Well, he uses several lines of evidence. One is developmental.
Like how kids learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Children develop semantic memory before episodic memory. They learn about the world before they start forming memories of specific events.
That makes sense.
Like a kid can learn that a dog is furry and has 4 legs, but it takes longer for them to remember specific times they played with a certain dog.
Oh, yeah, that's true. It's like they build the general knowledge first and then start slotting in the personal experiences.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got the developmental angle. What else?
Another big one is neuropsychological evidence. He looked at amnesic patients.
People who have memory loss.
Right. And often they have damaged episodic memory, but their semantic memory is fine.
So they can't remember what they had for breakfast, but they still know facts about the world.
Exactly. They might struggle to remember yesterday's conversations, but they can still access their general knowledge base.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's like different parts of their memory are working independently.
And there's this classic anecdote about a Swiss psychologist named Claparede who was treating an amnesic patient.
Okay, what happened?
So one day he hid a pin in his hand and pricked the patient when they shook hands.
Oh, geez.
Of course, later the patient couldn't remember the pinprick.
Because of the amnesia.
Right. But here's the crazy part. The next time Claparede went to shake her hand, she refused, even though she couldn't explain why.
Oh, wow. That's kind of creepy, but also amazing.
It is. It suggests that even if we can't consciously recall an experience, traces of it can still linger and affect our behavior.
Like a subconscious memory.
Yeah, and this phenomenon is called source amnesia. You can know something like not to shake that person's hand without remembering where you learned it.
I wonder how often that happens without us even realizing it.
It's probably more common than we think.
Okay, so we've got developmental evidence and neuropsychological evidence from these amnesic patients. What other evidence did Tulving use?
He also looked at experimental evidence. Studies show that you can manipulate episodic and semantic memory tasks in different ways.
Okay.
And these manipulations have distinct effects on each type of memory.
So even in a controlled lab setting, you see evidence that they function differently?
Yes. It further supports the idea that we're not dealing with a single, all-encompassing memory system.
So it sounds like he built a pretty strong case for his argument.
Mm.
But did everyone agree with him? Were all researchers on board with this idea of separate memory systems?
Well, not entirely. Some researchers argued for a continuum rather than distinct systems.
Like they're more interconnected.
Exactly. They suggested that maybe episodic and semantic memory are more intertwined than Tulving proposed.
So maybe it's not so black and white.
Right. But even if there's some overlap, his work definitely sparked a lot of debate and new research into all the different facets of memory.
It seems like he really pushed the field forward.
He did.
Okay, so all this talk about episodic memory being its own system, it's making me question my own memories.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like how much of what I think I remember is a genuine experience versus just general knowledge I've picked up along the way.
That's a great question, and one that Tulving explores in the book. To understand this better, we need to look at some of the unique characteristics of episodic memory.
Okay, so what makes episodic memory so special?
Well, for example, he talks about the nature of episodic memory units, what he calls events.
Events.
Yeah. What do you think makes an event in terms of episodic memory?
I guess an event would be like a specific happening in time. So if I went to the park with my friend yesterday, that would be an event.
That's a good start. To be more precise, Tulving distinguishes between the setting of an event and the focal elements within that setting.
Okay.
So the setting includes the time and place as well as its personal significance to you. So in your park example, the setting might be a sunny Saturday afternoon at my favorite park with my friend who I hadn't seen in a while.
Okay, I see.
And the focal elements are the specific happenings within that setting. So what did you actually do at the park?
Oh, okay. We walked around, talked about we did some people watching. Oh, and we got ice cream from that truck that's always near the playground.
There you go. Those are the focal elements, the
Yeah.
conversation, the people watching the ice cream.
And all of that together creates a unique episodic memory.
Yes. Now imagine you went to that same park with the same friend next Saturday. It would still be a unique event, right?
Yeah, that's true. We'd probably talk about different things, and even if we did the same things, it wouldn't feel exactly the same.
Exactly. And that's a key point Tulving makes. He stresses that events in the context of episodic memory are always unique. They never truly repeat themselves.
Yeah, I guess we tend to group similar experiences together, but each one is actually its own distinct memory.
Precisely.
That's kind of blowing my mind. It makes me think about something else. Tulving talks about the subjective experience of episodic memory. You know, it feels so real, like we're reliving it. But at the same time, we know that memory can be unreliable. So how does he address that?
He talks about the feeling of veridicality.
Veridicality.
Yeah, it's the inherent sense that our memories are true representations of the past.
Okay.
Even though we know our memories can be distorted or even completely false, sometimes we still have this strong feeling of knowing when we recall an episodic memory.
It's like even if someone shows me proof that a memory is wrong, the feeling of it being real is hard to shake.
Exactly. And that's a big difference between episodic and semantic memory. If you learn a fact and someone proves it wrong, you can update your knowledge without much fuss. But if someone challenges a vivid episodic memory, it can feel like they're challenging a part of your personal history.
It's like our episodic memories are more connected to who we are.
They're very closely tied to our sense of self.
Is there anything else that makes the experience of episodic memory unique?
Tulving also talks about the role of affect, or emotion.
Oh yeah, emotions.
Episodic memories are often strongly tied to our feelings.
I can see that.
Like think about a really happy memory. Remembering it brings back those feelings of joy. Or a painful event can make you feel those emotions all over again.
So it's not just remembering what happened, but also re-experiencing the emotions.
Exactly. It adds another layer to the memory.
This makes me wonder if computers could ever have episodic memories like we do.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, computers are great at storing and retrieving information, but could they ever have those emotionally charged time travel-like experiences that we have?
That's a question that's fascinated people for decades. And Tulving addresses it in the book.
Oh, he does? What does he say?
He's pretty skeptical about computers ever truly having episodic memories. He thinks they can store information about events, but they lack the subjective, embodied, time-bound experience that we have.
So a computer could record the date, time, and details of a meeting, but it wouldn't be able to relive it the way we do with all the nuances and emotions.
Right, it wouldn't have that I was there feeling that we get with episodic memory.
That's a really interesting distinction. It
Mhm.
makes you think about what it really means to have consciousness and a sense of self.
Yeah, if a computer could store information about events but not experience them the same way, would we even call those memories?
That's a great point. It's like the difference between reading a description of a beautiful sunset and actually being there to experience it yourself.
Yeah.
The information might be similar, but the experience is totally different.
Yeah, exactly. It highlights the limitations of trying to replicate human consciousness in a machine.
This is already making me rethink everything I thought I knew about memory.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. And it sounds like we're just scratching the surface here. What else does Tulving cover in the book when it comes to how our episodic memories are formed and how they can change over time?
Well, he goes into the process of encoding, which is basically how an experience gets turned into a memory trace, what he calls an enneagram.
Anagram, okay.
And he makes a big point that how we encode an event really affects how well we remember it later.
So it's not just about what happens, but how our minds process it.
Right.
So let's say I'm at a concert just having an amazing time. Is it more about the band, the music, the lights, or is it more about how my mind is taking all that in?
It's the interaction of both. He talks about this classic study where people were shown a list of words. Some were just told to remember the words, while others were given tasks that made them think about the words more deeply, like judging if the word was pleasant or unpleasant or thinking of a rhyme for it.
I bet those who had to really engage with the words remembered them better. Just reading a word doesn't make it stick.
You got it. The people who did what Tulving calls semantic encoding, really thinking about the meaning, did way better on memory tests.
So just being exposed to information isn't enough. To make it a lasting memory, you need to actively process it.
Exactly. It's like the difference between passively listening to something and actively engaging with it.
So if I want to remember something instead of just repeating it over and over, I'm better off thinking about what it means, connecting it to other things I know, trying to really understand it.
That's the key takeaway here. Active engagement is crucial for getting it into your episodic memory. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Tulving says memories aren't static.
What do you mean?
They can actually change over time through a process he calls recoding.
Recoding. So our memories are constantly being rewritten like a digital file or something.
Not exactly rewritten, but more like revised and updated.
Okay, so how does that work?
Recoding means that later experiences can actually modify our memories of past events.
Wait, so you're telling me our memories aren't like perfect recordings? They're more like stories we tell ourselves that can change over time.
That's a good way to think about it.
Wow, okay. I'm starting to see why this book is so groundbreaking.
He uses the example of research on eyewitness testimony. You know how studies have shown that the way questions are asked can actually change a person's memory of what they saw?
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. It's kind of scary how easily our memories can be manipulated.
It is. And even just talking about a memory with someone else can subtly change it.
This is blowing my mind. It makes you wonder how much of what we remember is actually accurate and how much has been colored by later experiences or information.
It's a big question. And Tulving says we need to be more aware of how this recoding happens often without us realizing it and how it affects what we remember.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew about memory. If our memories are so easy to change, is it possible that every time we access a memory, we're actually altering it in some way?
That's still being debated, but Tulving seems to suggest that recoding is more likely to happen when we come across new information related to a specific memory.
Okay, so give me an example.
Imagine you have this memory of a trip to the zoo when you were a kid. Years later, you watch a documentary about that same zoo. New facts, images, even emotions from the documentary might get mixed into your original memory, creating a slightly different version of it.
So it's not like every time I remember something, I'm completely rewriting it.
Yeah.
But when new information comes along, especially if it's really emotional or meaningful, it can blend with my existing memories and change how I remember the past.
Yeah, that's a good way to understand it. It shows how dynamic episodic memory is. It's not fixed and unchanging, but it's constantly encoding, recoding, and retrieving information.
This whole conversation is making me wonder, are episodic and semantic memory the only types of memory we have? Are there others?
He does mention other types. While he focuses mainly on episodic and semantic, he acknowledges that there are others at play. Like he briefly mentions procedural memory.
Procedural memory, what's that?
It's the memory for skills and habits. Things like riding a bike, typing on a keyboard, or driving a car, you do these things without consciously thinking about every step right.
Yeah, once you learn how to do them, they become almost automatic.
Exactly. That's procedural memory. It's different from episodic memory, which is remembering specific events, and semantic memory, which is knowing facts. Procedural memory is knowing how to do something. It's often unconscious and hard to explain in words.
So it's like the memory of the process itself, the steps involved in a particular action.
Right. It's like your body remembers how to do it, even if your mind can't always articulate it.
That's fascinating. It makes you think about how all these different memory systems work together, shaping our behavior and how we interact with the world. Does Tulving think there might be other memory systems out there that we haven't even discovered yet?
That's one of the things that makes this book so thought-provoking. He suggests there might be even more memory systems that we don't fully understand yet.
Like we're just scratching the surface.
Exactly. It's a reminder that while we've learned a lot about the brain, there's still so much we don't know.
Okay, so earlier we were talking about how emotions are tied to our episodic memories.
Hmm.
But what about remembering emotions themselves? Is there a specific system for that?
That's a great question. While Tulving doesn't specifically lay out a separate system for emotional memory in this book, he does acknowledge how crucial emotions are in shaping our memories.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about how emotions can affect how memories are encoded and how they're retrieved later on. And he points out that when we remember an event, we often re-experience the emotions we felt at the time.
So even if there's not a dedicated system, it sounds like emotions are woven into the fabric of our memories, especially our episodic memories.
I'd agree with that.
It's amazing how much we've learned from just this one book,
Mm.
but I also feel like we barely scratched the surface.
I agree. And that's the beauty of Tulving's work. He gives us this framework for understanding memory, but he also raises so many new questions and opens up new paths for exploration. He even touches on these fascinating little bits of knowledge he calls free radicals.
Free radicals, what are those?
Think of them as these rogue agents of memory.
Yeah.
They're like fragments of past experiences that haven't been fully integrated into our organized knowledge structures. They exist outside of both episodic and semantic memory.
So like bits of information floating around without a clear connection to a specific event or a broader concept. Can you give me an example?
Imagine you remember a joke, but you have no idea where you heard it or who told it to you. The punchline is there, but the source is gone. That's a free radical.
Yeah, totally.
Hmm.
I have so many jokes I use and I have no clue where I learned them. They're
Yeah.
just there.
Exactly. There are these interesting little bits of knowledge, like puzzle pieces, that haven't found their place in the bigger picture of our memory. Tulving thinks they might be leftovers from past episodes that haven't been absorbed into our semantic knowledge, or maybe even a unique type of memory altogether.
Huh. So they're operating outside the normal rules of memory. That's wild.
It's a reminder that our minds are far more complex than we often give them credit for.
Okay, so are there any other examples of memory working in ways we wouldn't typically expect?
There's another fascinating distinction that comes up in Tulving's book, the concept of working memory versus reference memory.
Okay, I'm not familiar with those. What's the difference?
This distinction actually came from animal research, especially studies with mazes like the radial arm maze.
Okay, I'm picturing a maze, but I'm not sure what a radial arm maze is. What's special about them?
So picture a central platform with a bunch of arms coming out like spokes on a wheel. At the end of each arm, there might be a reward like food. The challenge for the animal is to remember which arms it's already visited so it doesn't waste time going back to empty ones.
Makes sense. So what kinds of memory do they use to solve this?
Researchers found that they need two types of memory to do this well. First, they need reference memory. This is for the long-term knowledge about the maze, like understanding that food is always at the end of an arm and that some arms never have food. It's like having a mental map of the maze.
So reference memory gives them the general layout. What about the second type?
That's working memory. They need this to keep track of which arms they've already visited on that specific trial. It's like a short-term mental checklist that gets updated as they go.
Ah, so they use reference memory for the big picture and working memory for the specifics of each run through the maze.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that damage to a certain part of the brain, the hippocampus, really messed up working memory but didn't affect reference memory as much.
So just like with episodic and semantic memory, different brain areas are involved in these different types of memory.
Right. It's like there's this division of labor in the brain when it comes to memory.
It's amazing that even animals who don't have the same complex language or self-awareness as humans still rely on these different memory systems to navigate the world and solve problems.
It really highlights how essential memory is to all living creatures, not just us.
It makes you realize that memory is so much more than just remembering facts or events. It's this incredible ability that allows us to learn, adapt, and make sense of our experiences.
Absolutely. It's the foundation of who we are.
Okay, so this whole discussion about different memory systems has been fascinating. But I'm curious about something. Tulving seems to emphasize the limitations of studying the human mind purely through experiments. What does he mean by that?
Yeah, he acknowledges that those mini events we often study in the lab, like memorizing word lists or recognizing patterns, they don't always reflect the complexity of memory in real life.
Right, it's kind of like trying to understand the whole ocean just by looking at a single drop of water.
Exactly. He argues that we need to go beyond just lab settings and see how memory works out in the world, the messy dynamic world we live in.
So you're saying we need to study memory in a more naturalistic way.
Right. He calls for more ecological validity in research, like how well do lab results apply to actual real life situations?
So it's not that lab experiments are bad, but we need to be aware of what they can't tell us and find ways to study memory in more realistic settings too.
Exactly. And we've actually seen a lot more of that in recent years. There are studies now looking at how people remember everyday events, how they build memories of their lives, and how social interactions shape what they remember and how they remember it.
It's like memory research is moving out of the lab and into the real world, which makes sense considering memory is all about how we experience the world.
That's a good point. And this shift is leading to some really interesting new findings. For example, there's growing evidence that our social connections and the stories we share play a huge role in how we create and hold on to our autobiographical memories, the stories of our lives.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Our memories aren't formed in a vacuum. We talk about our experiences, we reminisce with people, we even argue about what really happened. It's like our memories are always being shaped and reshaped through these interactions.
Right. Memory is inherently social. We depend on others to help us remember to confirm our memories and to build a shared understanding of the past.
This is making me think about my own memories, how they've been influenced not just by what I experienced, but also by the people I shared those experiences with. It really shows the power of stories, how they help us connect with others and create a sense of shared history.
It all comes back to what Tulving is getting at. Memory isn't just a neutral recording of the past. It's personal, subjective, and tied to our emotions, our relationships, and who we are as individuals.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. We've explored the differences between episodic and semantic memory. We've talked about the complexities of encoding and recoding, and we even went into those fascinating areas of free radicals and procedural memory.
And we've seen how memory is so much more than just remembering. It's an active process that shapes how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
Tulving's work has clearly had a huge impact on how we study and think about memory. It challenged the old ways of thinking and opened up new avenues for research. His ideas really encourage us to keep asking questions, to keep exploring the mysteries of the mind, and to appreciate how incredible memory is.
It's truly amazing how this ability we often take for granted, our ability to remember, is really this tapestry woven from so many different threads: our experiences, our emotions, our relationships, and our interactions with the world.
So as we wrap up this episode, we want to leave you with this thought. What are the most vivid and precious episodic memories you have? Those special events, the feelings they brought up, and how they've shaped you into the person you are today.
And maybe even more interesting, think about how those memories might continue to change and evolve as you keep living your life and sharing your stories. Because as we've learned from Tulving, memory isn't just about the past. It's a living process that shapes who we are now and who we'll become in the future.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into memory. We'll see you next time.